Hello there, friends. 5th September is the birthday of Professor Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan, arguably modern India's greatest philosopher. And of course, the first Vice President and the second President of the Indian Republic. And this is celebrated as the Teachers' Day. Now, friends, obviously, the first teacher that one has are one's parents, especially one's mother, and of course, the grace of the goddess Saraswati that endows you with wisdom, with knowledge, and learning. But then, in any student's life, in any man's life, it is teacher's contribution that really chisels and shapes you. Because we are born as infants, we don't even know how to speak, much less read and write, and much less think independently. So teachers have a great role in a person's life, goes without saying. But something which I would like to underline and underscore, there is a lot of difference between a teacher and a tutor. A tutor is basically responsible from the beginning for the 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic, and then teaching you subjects, basically disseminating knowledge at you. A teacher, on the other hand, inspires you, helps you to discover yourself. What are your latent talents? That is what a teacher does. So just as every press correspondent is not a journalist, in my humble opinion, every tutor is not a teacher. A teacher has to inspire and bring out that latent talent, look at your aptitude, and then guide you smoothly along the path where you can actualize whatever is lying latent inside you. Teaching, a great philosopher, I forget the name, said, it is not a vessel to be filled, it is a candle to be lighted. So that is the subtle difference. A teacher is the candle and he illuminates. It is not as if he has got some knowledge and is pouring into you and you are learning by rota, what we call in Hindi and Punjabi rata la liya. So a teacher helps you to think independently, logically, critically, not only just to ask the questions, not only just to answer the questions, but also question the answers. Sometimes even question the axioms. So that is what a good teacher, it is not a one-way communication that he's speaking. He welcomes questions, he welcomes queries, because unless you clarify your doubts, how will you learn? And there is no better way of clarifying your doubts than by asking questions. Now, friends, I really wanted this little talk to be a kind of a small autobiographical account wherein I would mention teachers who really have inspired me and challenged me. Of course, if I do not mention some names, does not mean their contribution in my molding and morphing as a human being, as an officer, is to be missing. But within the limited constraints of the time that we have, I would like to mention a few teachers, mentors, guides who have really touched me and inspired me. I joined Yadavindra Public School, Patiala in September 1967 in class 2nd. Before that, I was going to a government school called Modern School Pilkhana, which is Hathi Khana in Patiala. But somehow I was able to convince my father that I should be going to Yadavindra Public School, and there I landed up in September. And mind you, the class 2 final examination was in December. So it was a path where junior school teachers took over, and I was able to gradually learn English because I was going to a Punjabi medium school earlier, and was before long kind of mingled into the mainstream. Of course, in a boarding school such as the Yadavindra Public School, Patiala, you have day scholars on one side, the lesser mortals, and of course the boarders and the housing system and so on. So the first teacher who really inspired me regarding English, because before that I was learning English only as something to be written grammatically. He taught us to read the newspapers, to say something which creates an imagery. I remember it was 1975, we would have been in class 8th or 9th, and this World Cup at Kuala Lumpur, which India ultimately won, was going on. And he said, India attacked Pakistan goal is one way of writing. The other was, India swarmed the Pak citadel in waves. So citadel, a new word learned, and swarmed, that means number of forward players converging in waves, one after the other. And we also were being taught from class 9th Merchant of Venice, our first initiation to the bard William Shakespeare. And there he said, these words which are coming, if you are sitting like an old man, that's one way of saying, but if you want to quote Shakespeare within quotes, why are you sitting like a grandsire cut in alabaster, which has been derived from Merchant of Venice. So that really carried on and brought about a kind of new dimension into the English that I wrote, I write, and I speak. Then, of course, we had mathematics teacher, Mr. Sam Rizvi, I forget, SAM, a Muslim gentleman, very fine teacher who would inspire. And from class 6th and class 7th onwards, somehow in the ICSE syllabus, they had given us modern maths. Ours was the first batch that was going to the ICSE system. And there was no choice, we had to have modern mathematics. And I'm telling you, in class 6 and 7, we were learning coordinate geometry in 2 dimensions, we were learning the set theory. And the way he taught us, and I still remember, after having taught for 2 or 3 periods, he asked me asked the class, what is the equation of the x-axis? And the entire class said x is equal to 0. And I gave a deep thought and said, y is equal to 0. And he said, could you explain? And I explained that y is equal to 0 because x-axis is vertical. So the y is remaining at 0, x could be anything from 0 to infinity, literally. And he then asked another question. We were dealing with rotation and reflection of points in the coordinates. We had done reflection. He said, what if you rotate this point on the origin 180 degrees? So I gave a thought. I said, well, x and y would remain the same, but the signs would change. So x1, y1 would go to minus x1, y1. I remember he gave me a pat on the back and asked the class to applaud, and that really built my interest in mathematics. And had I not strayed into engineering, electronics engineering, I may have gone into very fundamental research in mathematics. But those are the 2 teachers which I remember in school who really inspired me on side of English and mathematics. As I said, ours was the first batch of ICSE, and the +2, we were not sure whether it's going to be recognized or not. So we took the final examination in December 1976, and I joined 11th class in YPS. And so we were studying physics, chemistry, maths, and also Macbeth, Shakespeare's Macbeth in English. But ultimately, having pursued for 6 months, the college sessions were opening up, and I landed up in Multani Mal Modi Degree College, Patiala, in August 1977 for my pre-university and subsequently pre-engineering. So mind you, I had practically spent 6 months in the ICSE 2 years course beyond class 10th, and so had covered sufficient syllabus. But there, I would specifically like to mention Professor Surinder Lal. He is still alive and kicking and very bright, and I am in touch with him. And he was writing a book on physics because the pre-engineering syllabus had changed. And some of the physics which I had picked up in class 11th in YPS, or part the first semester thereof, I was able to kind of interact with him at a particular plane. So I helped him with the manuscript. And I must say that he encouraged me to develop a deeper interest into physics. And in the first edition, he dedicated, or at least acknowledged, my humble contribution in correcting the manuscript, which was for a student of pre-engineering who's not even an adult yet, was a kind of a big boost, and also created a tremendous amount of interest for my further pursuit in engineering and especially in physics, which was also one of my subjects, incidentally, in the civil services main examination, physics. Then I landed into Thapar Engineering College, affiliated then to Punjabi University, Patiala. Now, of course, it is a deemed university. And in the very first semester, our physics teacher, Dr. H.R. Anand, PhD from Purdue University, he's no more, may his soul rest in peace. He taught us physics. And I was really inspired by the way he made things simple. In the third semester, he taught us material science. In seventh semester, he taught us electromagnetism. And really, in each of these very difficult and conceptually difficult subjects, he would make things very simple. And more than physics, some of the adges or some of the sayings that he would say, those have stuck with me. He said, for instance, all other things being equal. Sometimes you have to analyze, you say, everything else remaining same, how does this interact with this parameter? And better to be approximately correct than to be precisely wrong. You would simply have a look at an answer and say it is wrong. Why? Because if this is the part of the magnetic field that you're arriving at, you would really suck the entire universe into use. You cannot have a magnetic power of so many Teslas. So better to be approximately correct than to be precisely wrong. And then other thing was about correlationship and causality. You have more rain, you have better crops. There's a correlationship. But there is also causality. You have more rain, therefore you have good crops. It is not the other way around. So later in my life in Indian Administrative Service, we were doing whether female literacy has anything got to do with female feticide. We were doing these correlationships and these type of things. What causes the other? Causality, in what direction the causality is going, I owe to Dr. H.R. Anand. And then, of course, we had Professor P.K. Bansal. I have again interacted with him. He's still very well, and he taught us digital electronics. At the time, Intel's microprocessors were coming. I learned that to him. My project in the final year was with him. And he was a quiet man while we were in college, but subsequently when we met, he said, there were other bright students who would kind of get full marks in these engineering type of subjects. But in your case, you would literally snatch the marks out of our hands. So those type of things, they really encouraged me. And because of him, I said that within the Indian Administrative Service main examination, which I took in the year 1983-84, that I must take electronics engineering as a subject along with physics. If I've studied for 8 semesters, then I would be failing in my duty if I do not opt for that. So this is all due to Professor P.K. Bansal. Thank you, sir. I myself formally remained a lecturer. I've spoken elsewhere in Thapar Engineering College while I was taking the civil service examination. I had taken my final examination and I had to prepare for the main examination, interview and so on. So I took up employment. Very graciously they'd offered me, of a lecturer, and in the very first semester I was teaching the final year students. So literally my friends who were 1 year junior, I was teaching them electromagnetic waves, and next semester third year students I was teaching them material science, both very difficult subjects to teach. And simultaneously also the first year students I was taking the lab electronics classes. And what I can say with a degree of confidence, and I'm quoting my students who are some of them my junior colleagues, that I inspired at least half a dozen of my juniors and students to take the civil service examination, because when I was doing and when I ultimately cleared and got the second rank in All India merit in the very first attempt, that really ignited, and they could see, well, if Karanbir could get there, let's try. And two of them got into the Indian Revenue Service, they're still serving, and one of them who was then in first year is a Punjab cadre, very senior IAS officer, technically my student. And of course the equation of a junior senior officer being apart, the fact that I was their student is something which they mention with pride, and I also mention that with pride. Getting into IAS after our phase 1 of training in Mussoorie, where there were too many people, too many lectures, too many guest lecturers, I was then into the district of Patiala, where I landed up, you could say, sometime in the May of 1985. And 1973 batch officer Mr. S.K. Sinha, alas, he's no more. Those were troubled times, post Blue Star, Rasta Roko, the Rajiv Longowal Accord had just happened, and those were very sensitive and troubled times. And Mr. S.K. Sinha was the Deputy Commissioner Patiala, and I was the Assistant Commissioner under training. Now, when I landed up there, he asked me a simple and straightforward question. He said, Sidhu, who's in charge of your training? I said, sir, Chief Secretary Punjab. He said, no. I said, sir, Lal Bahadur Shastri, National Academy of Administration. He shouted, no. I said, realizing that, I missed out my deputy commissioner, I said, sir, Janabe ne, sir, you are the in charge of my training. He said, no, who told you that? I said, no, what do you do? I said, Government of India Department of Personnel and Training, sir, is in charge of my training. He said, you got it all wrong. You yourself are the in charge of your training. If you want to have a nice time, take this jeep and do whatever you want to. But if you want to learn, I am going to put you in the subdivision Tehsil at Naba and learn revenue law, get the independent charge of the Napsildar, of the Tehsildar, go to the field, take up the charge of the BDO and learn. So that was a teacher in a genuine sense of the term, and built up such a sound foundation that when I landed up on my first assignment in August 1986 in Samrala, I thought, and I was very confident that I could do it. And that brings me to my second teacher whom I would like to mention within the IAS. Sardar Amrik Singh Puni, he retired as Chief Secretary Punjab, alas, he is no more. He was Divisional Commissioner of Patiala at that time. And Samrala, as a part of Ludhiana district, was a part of his jurisdiction. So I invited him to conduct an inspection of the subdivisional office so that all the shortcomings and drawbacks could be highlighted, and yet I could not be held responsible for those because I had just taken over, but they would be the beginning of my reform process or making good whatever was falling short. So we had a nice training, a nice inspection, and we were sitting and having lunch in the PTDC restaurant at Neelom. And he said, well, I would like to meet your reader, Mr. Inder San. I said, so why? He said, I've had the pleasure of sitting in appeal over orders drafted and written by him for the past so many years, although 4 or 5 subdivisional magistrates have come and gone. So it was a very subtle message for me that I should be writing the orders myself. I said, sir, I found one thing, that we've had practical training in the field, we've got 2 phases of training in Mussoorie, yet sometimes when I come here and I am faced with the practicalities of a subdivisional magistrate's life, I find myself ill-equipped. There is no handbook. What do I do? He said, why don't you write one? I said, sir, how can I write one? I'm still under probation. I'm a subdivisional magistrate. I have still not completed even my tenure and stint as a subdivisional magistrate. And it would be audacious for me to, or arrogance for me to start writing. He said, don't complain. This is the time you can write. You are not married and you got in the sand to do your typing. And that's the time when I started writing chapter by chapter, not only the theoretical, the underlying statutory principles, but also the practical aspects of a subdivisional magistrate's work. And that little book, which was in stenciled and cyclostyled through the Government of Punjab, landed up with the Mussoorie Academy, and from the Mussoorie Academy it landed up in the Department of Personnel and Training, Government of India, and in 1988 it was published as an official publication. And Sardar Amrik Singh Pune, as Divisional Commissioner, had done me the honor of writing the preface. It still continues, I'm told. The law has changed, many things have come, but things like the revenue law in Punjab, like the Code of Criminal Procedure, calamity relief, the basic underlying principles remain the same. I could leave a link of the e-book with you and you could find it of some value. I'm told it is a must read of the probationers in the Mussoorie National Academy. So Sardar Amrik Singh Pune, great teacher, and Mr. S.K. Sinha as my first Deputy Commissioner under training, what a great mentor and a teacher he was. Now friends, thereafter one has gotten to service, one has learned from all the seniors, one has learned from the colleagues, one has learned from the junior officers whom you are supposed to train. So I would not like to take names because each one has taught me. Some people have taught how to do things, others have taught us how not to do things. But that is one thing about the Indian Administrative Service, that the mentoring which starts right from your age as an Assistant Commissioner under training, where you're supposed to be calling on the Chief Secretary, you're calling on the District Magistrate and the Collector, you're calling on the senior officers as a part of your training. Each one will give you some nugget of wisdom and that sticks. For instance, one senior officer, now retired, he said, do anything but don't get cynical. The other one said, if you want to avoid one thing in civil service, like plague, avoid controversy. A civil servant cannot afford controversy. So those are the type of things which seniors in the Indian Administrative Service, in my stint in the state, also my 3-year stint in Government of India, have taught. Similarly, the political leaders, ministers, chief ministers, they've also taught. And one thing which I learned from one of the chief ministers was that he would speak last in the meeting, not give his mind. He would pose a problem and say, yes, let's go around the table. He wouldn't even start with the chief secretary, because once you open your card, then everyone would say, हाँ जनाब, ऐसा ही करना चाहिए, we must do it this way. So we would listen, expressionless, and coming back, then he would reveal, after having absorbed the views of everyone along the table, and then reach a kind of consensus. So which is a leadership quality, and some of the Western leadership gurus are not talking in terms of leaders eat last, but here was an example of a chief minister opting to speak last, not because he had, obviously without dispute, the last word, but because he wanted to hear in an important meeting what even the junior most officer in the room wanted to say. So I am glad and I feel I'm blessed that in the last year of my service, I'm now looking after the Mahatma Gandhi State Institute of Public Administration, which is meant and set up by Punjab government to train the new inductees, the new officers of the Punjab cadre of IAS, also the state civil services, Tahsildar, NAPSildars, in-service training courses. We are also the regional center for officers from central services coming. There are statutes like the Right to Information Act which cut across the government departments. And I really feel honored and blessed that I'm able to teach and pass on my experience for such benefit that may derive. And in this day and age of COVID, the e-learning part of it, where we used to have a course run by for 30 people, 40 people, maybe 60. Now we can have a Cisco web course where 1,000 people register and 800 are online. And in this mission Karam Yogi, which has only a couple of days ago been unveiled by the Government of India, the training of civil servants is going to be at the forefront. Training of civil servant from Group D to the IAS, from the induction till the retirement. And also the civil servants, when they retire, to give back to the youngsters or to negotiate this difficult landscape. And needless to say, the aspirants of the civil service examination, in their lakhs who take it, the idea is to inspire them. There are a number of training coaches and institutions which do that. But the idea is, if you can ignite, there are many people who have the talent, who have the inbuilt capacity, have the tenacity, but no one really tells them. And this is the beauty of a good teacher. A teacher, in my opinion, is not successful unless he is able to produce students and trainees better than himself. Going back to Mahabharata, if you see, Dronacharya you remember because he produced people like Arjun, the great warriors. And that's how we remember Dronacharya. Parsuram, who trained Karan, we remember him. Of course, in case of Dronacharya, we also remember the Eklavya episode. But the whole idea is that a teacher has to produce students better than himself. A teacher has to produce people who outdo him. Just like you have coaches who may not win the Olympic medals, but they have to produce trainees who do so. So friends, it's Teachers' Day. We can all be teachers in our own way, not only to our children, not only to our junior colleagues, not only to the people directly under our charge. We can be teachers qua literally the whole of the humanity. This internet and the reach thereof gives us and empowers us. And let us therefore resolve on this solemn occasion of the Teachers' Day, the birthday of late President Radhakrishnan, great Indian philosopher, that we will rededicate ourselves to pay back not only upon our retirement, but while we are there in real time, to disseminate, to teach, to train, to inspire. Thanks for joining and have a great holiday.